Know Thyself to Spark Growth in Your Firm with Dustyn Coontz, episode 327. Are you ready to make your law firm a profit-generating machine that will free up your time and skyrocket your impact? With more than 2 decades of business growth experience and having proven that you can be successful while prioritizing your family and your impact, introducing the Profit with Law podcast. I am your host, the creator of the Firm Differentiator 10X Effect, Moshe Amsel. Well, hello and welcome to another amazing guest interview here on the Profit with Law podcast. I'm your host, Moshe Amsel, and I'm excited about our guest today because unlike many guests in the past, this is a guest that I met in person before inviting him over to the show. Recently, I had the opportunity to attend Max LawCon, that's the Maximum Lawyers Conference, and I met a ton of great, amazing lawyers there. And anybody that I had the opportunity to connect with. I also discussed the opportunity of coming and being on the podcast. And folks, if you're listening to this and you have a story to share, you have a journey that you've been on and you're interested in being on the show, we're always looking for guests. So just send an email to info@dreambuilderfinancial.com. It'll be in the show notes in the resources section. Let us know. We'd love to have you. So our guest today is a law firm owner and a successful law firm owner. But more importantly, we really hit it off because we have a daughter that is the same age. My daughter Rachel and his daughter Lillian are literally days apart. So we definitely had some notes to compare when it came to that. And I really got excited when I heard about what he's doing with his law firm and some of his journey. And I'm excited to be able to share him with you today. Now, folks, before I bring him onto the show and I tell you who he is, I just want to let you know that we have only just a few spots left for this month for our free coaching calls. So we offer free coaching calls with our coaches, and that is the gateway into our elite lawyer coaching program. No pressure with the free call. You do not need to join the program, but you will get the opportunity to see what it's like to be on the receiving end of some coaching. And if you find that call to be impactful to you, then maybe it's the right step for you to continue with us. But if you want to take advantage of that, we've been mentioning it in the last few episodes, and we only have a certain number of slots every month, and those slots are almost full. So you want to make sure that you book that call. Go to profitwithlaw.com/free coaching, profitwithlaw.com/free coaching, and book that call now. Again, that'll also be in the resources section. You can get anything that we mentioned on the podcast today by simply going to profitwithlaw.com and go into the show notes page for this episode. It's kind of a blog post with a summary and all kinds of good stuff in it, but there's also a resources section that has all the links that we share today. So our guest today is Dustyn Coontz. Dustyn Coontz is the founder. I think I'm supposed to say founder. I don't remember. But anyway, he is the founder, the owner of Coontz Law. He's a husband to Stephanie, dad to Lily, a human, and Archie, a dog, and an eternally optimistic fan of the Detroit Lions. Oh, I didn't know you were a football fan. We didn't cover that. He also owns Coontz Law, a firm dedicated to protecting ordinary Michiganders against the government. Currently, he spends his spare time humbling himself by taking Taekwondo classes with Lily and learning to play ice hockey. Dustyn is on a lifelong quest to maximize the gifts of his ADHD. Dustyn, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Very well written bio. So thank you for that.
I don't know who wrote that, but
somebody smart.
Yeah. But it's good. I love Archie the dog. Where does his name come from?
My wife and I thought Archibald was a funny name, and
so did you name him Archibald?
That's the story.
Or was it?
I mean, I suppose if he had a birth certificate, that's what would be on it. But he just goes by Archie.
Yeah. So we have a dog as well. And we named him Rascal Flats.
Oh, okay. Yeah, are you a
So
big
that
fan, or is there?
big fan of Rascal
Yeah,
Flats.
yeah,
Yeah, my wife and I both into the band. They stopped touring, but we were going out at one point. We were going to every concert that was anywhere near us. So, yeah, he's got that name, but it got shortened to Rascal, so everyone thinks, oh, you just named him Rascal, but no, there's more to his name, which is why I always ask, like, yay, what's behind your dog's name? All right, so when I start an episode with a guest, I start with an easy one. People haven't heard of you. Maybe they have. Our listeners maybe tuned into the Maximum Law group. You're pretty active in there. So maybe they know who you are, but many of them don't. Why don't you take just a few moments to tell us who is Dustyn, and maybe how'd you end up an attorney or end up a law firm owner? Give us a little bit of your journey so we know who you are.
sure. Was born in the great city of Lansing, Michigan, which is where I'm coming lower middle class, probably lower class, with a single mom. My dad was very much in the picture. They just got divorced when I was super young. And mom did her best with what she had. Couldn't have the good cereal because we had like welfare wouldn't cover it or something like that. So I had to eat like bran flakes instead of Fruit Loops or whatever. But I saw how hard she worked. My dad too, and she went back to school when I was 4 or so. Ended up getting her college degree, and then fast forward a little bit, puts herself through law school, accumulating a lot of debt on the way, unfortunately. But there she met my stepdad at law school. So by the time I was in middle school, all of a sudden I had 2 lawyers for parents, and that's not what made me want to be a lawyer. That's what made me not want to be a lawyer. And so, yeah, I get through high school. I went to college at a small university no one's ever heard of, Spring Arbor University in like South Central Michigan. And through undergrad, I had an internship. I wanted to be somebody who saved the world, and so I had an internship in DC with a nonprofit organization that was focused on the genocide in Sudan going on at the time. And there I got really interested in international criminal law and became convinced that it's my destiny to prosecute warlords and dictators. And so that's kind of what set me on the path to law school. That was, I think, between my junior and senior years of undergrad. Ended up taking a couple years off, and then went to law school again, thinking international law was the thing. And in law school, a couple things were happening simultaneously. One, I was taking criminal procedure, which was the most fascinating, engaging subject matter in law school by far.
In your opinion?
In my opinion, sure. Yeah. I think everyone agrees it's better than property law, contracts. It's got to be. And at the same time, it was kind of like the early stages of the Black Lives Matter movement. I was going to law school when the George Zimmerman trial was happening, when Tamir Rice and Eric Garner, Philando Castile, Michael Brown were all gunned down, to name a few. And in that time, I became intensely interested in criminal law and intensely interested in how I can use my privilege as a white guy in America to help others. And so kind of decided, coming out of law school, criminal law was the thing. That said, I did get into the Air Force JAG Corps as like my first gig out of law school.
Mm-hmm.
But then I didn't clear the medical stuff from some things I dealt with when I was a kid. And so then I was left scrambling for a job when, all the good ones were taken, and ended up working for a probate judge as law clerk, because it was the first job offer I got, and it was actually incredibly fortuitous. She's the best boss by far that I ever had. She's so funny, so irreverent. I loved her. And then she put me in touch with a guy I went to work for who was a fairly well-known criminal defense attorney in Flint. They were
Mm-hmm.
friends, and she knew I wanted to do criminal defense. So went and worked for another criminal defense attorney where I learned a lot about the practice area. But I also saw some things that just like drove me crazy in the day-to-day running of the law firm. And it wasn't really the clientele I wanted to serve. Some like white collar stuff and things like that. So it was a really good experience for learning what I did want to do and what I didn't want to do if I opened my own law firm. And then you alluded to Maximum Lawyer. I got I got hooked on the Maximum Lawyer podcast and Lawyers podcast while I was still working for somebody else, and decided I was going to start my own firm. So as of May 2018, Coontz Law has had its doors open to the public. And then a few months after starting the practice, I moved it back to my hometown of Lansing, because I knew that was the community I wanted to serve.
What this is an incredible journey and story, and thank you for sharing that with us, with our listeners. You've been in business for 3+ years, maybe approaching 4 years. What does your firm look like now, as far as number of people working there or volume of work? How can we quantify where you're at in your journey?
Sure. So yeah, we just celebrated our 4th birthday last month. I'm not, I'll be honest here. I'm not great with my numbers,
Mm-hmm.
but what I can tell you is, for sure, is we have 12 people here all together right now. So there's me, we have 2 other attorneys here, 2 US-based client-facing people, client care coordinators, their title
Mm-hmm.
here. One of them is focused on bringing in and onboarding new clients. The other is focused on servicing our existing clients. I have a part-time US-based virtual assistant who happens to be my best friend's wife,
Mm-hmm.
and she's great. And right now we have a summer intern, associate law clerk, whatever her job title is. And then we have 5 virtual assistants based out of the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
And 3 of them are kind of like legal assistants, scheduling pleadings, things like that. 1 is focused on helping me improve our systems, and 1 is another client care coordinator. She kind of serves as our after hours person.
Yeah, so I'm curious, do you have 5 Filipino VAs? Are they working in their time zone or in your time zone? I have Filipino VAs myself, and mine work in their time zone. So they start 9 p.m. my time and finish 5 a.m. my time. What are yours? What's your experience with yours?
So our legal assistants, they all work our hours.
Mm-hmm.
So for them, it's 3rd shift, the graveyard shift, whatever. I hear, and I don't know if this, I'm just told this to make myself feel better, but I hear
Mm-hmm.
it's actually, they like that because
Mm-hmm.
it's really hot there, and so
Mm-hmm.
the nights are cooler. Um, and then our kind of systems administrator, she has like a very flexible schedule. And she's in grad school in Paris right now. So she's on an even different schedule. And then our
Mhm.
client care coordinator, she just kind of, I guess it's an early morning for her, but she starts work at, I want to say 4 and goes till midnight or 1 our
Mhm.
time.
Yeah, and the truth is that I always assumed that people don't want to work during their night, so I never wanted to hire somebody who's going to have to work during their night. But the reality is that as I've been coaching my own clients to expand their horizon of what's out there for the workforce and what's possible, because clearly you can't get what you're paying for those 5 people. You can't get probably one employee stateside for the same price, or maybe it's the equivalent of one. So you get a lot of manpower for the same investment. As my clients go through that journey, I've been schooled and educated on the fact that there are people in the Philippines who prefer these other schedules, and you just need to be careful to make sure that the person you're hiring actually has a desire to work during that time, because you don't want to have somebody do something they don't want to do or they're not going to enjoy.
Right.
But as long as you've got that figured out, the rest should be fine. What is your experience with those virtual assistants in the Philippines? Are you going out and finding them yourself? And uh, how easy was it? Did you have to go through a lot to find the ones that are working?
Yeah, I've been fairly fortunate. So I've recruited through onlinejobs.ph. It's
Mm-hmm.
just a VA platform for workers in the Philippines. And I posted a job to hire a person to help me with kind of like building out some of our CRM systems, whatever. And I got like 55 applications, but through that, and through, putting them through little tests I devised, there were 3 I just I don't know. I had one in mind for the job I posted, but then I had these other 2. It's like I have to hire them. They're just
Right.
too good to to pass up. And so I brought those 3 on, and then the other 2 have actually been friends of 2 of my first 3 hires out of the Philippines.
Yeah, and that often happens, right? And you have somebody who's good, who's working for you, and then they know somebody who would be a good fit, and they introduce them. But really, this idea that you went to hire one and you ended up with 3, I think there's a lesson there. And I tell my clients, I even think I talk about it here on the podcast. I don't recall what episode it's been discussed, but I'm fairly certain it's been mentioned here. Is that as an employer or as a business owner, you always need to have your eyes open for good talent. I mean, you could be in line at Starbucks ordering your coffee and somebody makes a good impression on you. You should be checking out to see if they're looking for a job and interviewing them and vetting them for your business. Because it's hard to find good people, and they're not necessarily going to be looking at the exact time that you're looking. So you always want to be looking for good talent. You always want to keep your eyes open. I even had a conversation with somebody recently saying, hey, look, when you post a job, you don't actually have to hire anybody. So why would you not have a job posting for an attorney that's always open? Because then you can, when somebody amazing walks through your door, even if you're not ready to hire them, you now know who they are. And you can always say, oh, look, something changed. We're not hiring this position right now, but is it okay if I reach out to you when something opens up? And who's going to say no to that, right? So now you've got that person in the wings, but even better if you can actually just bring them on if they come across your desk. But the best time to hire somebody is when you're not desperate for somebody. So it's just a little hack that people can try.
It's also a good way to kind of diversify your portfolio, which I learned the hard way, because I did the same thing when my second attorney that I went to hire. I ended up not being able to choose between 2 of them. Brought both of them on. They're fresh out of law school, and one just left us a couple months ago. And if I had been a betting man, it was the one I didn't think would leave for a long time, but she took another job. So
Yeah. And that just goes to show that like you can't put all your eggs in one basket. You can't assume what somebody's going to do, and people have their own choice. And you can be great at finding a good candidate, and you can vet them, hire them, train them, get them really good, and then they can just leave. So that's just one of the risks that you have as a business owner. And you're absolutely right. Like there's, and this seems to be, it seems to be your MO, right? Like you go to hire somebody and you find two candidates or three candidates, and you're just like, all right, let's just bring them all on. And it's actually a really, there's two ways to look at that, right? Like that's a lot of people will look at that as a very high risk aspect, and then other people will look at it and say, that's clearly how you've been successful so far, is by being willing to take on these people even when you weren't necessarily looking for them or ready for them. That's propelled your growth. Looking back, would you say that bringing the extra personnel on actually made you grow faster, because now you had to fill their plate and you had to, you had the capacity to bring in more work that you may not have been looking for otherwise?
Yes, 100%.
So you've come a long way in 4 years. You have 12 people, you've got three attorneys, including yourself, right? I got those numbers correct. Yeah. If you look back on your journey in the last 4 years, what do you think the key is to growing your firm? Is it hiring people? Are there things you did on the marketing side that really moved the needle for you? Like where do you think the biggest levers were in your growth?
Yeah. So permission to get a little I don't know, woo-woo for a second, a little.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Love woo.
So I think it's actually it's more foundational than those things. The moment I can like distinctly point to is August, I want to say 6th of 2020. Yeah, first pandemic summer. And that's when I received a diagnosis of ADHD at the age of 32 at the time. And I'm not the reason, I'm in my 30s before I get diagnosed is because I'm not what people think of when they think of ADHD. I wasn't the kid, disrupting class. I was a very good student by and large, and but I would daydream and kind of get lost in my own head, my own ideas sometimes, and my mom would even call me mad scientist or absent-minded professor. That's what she would call me as a kid. And so in getting diagnosed, it helped me kind of put a label on who I am and how I'm wired, and I could begin to see my quote unquote shortcomings as something that's just kind of to an extent biologically hardwired in me, and but also my strengths to some extent, to a large extent, are biologically hardwired in me.
Right.
And so that is kind of the point at which things really began to take off. Hired at that time, it was the firm was me, kind of do-it-all assistant, and then a receptionist service, and marketing vendors and whatever. But shortly after that, I hired the first attorney because I realized, well, if I am in court all of the time and jumping from case to case to case, as one does in criminal defense, I can't hyper focus, and that's where I'm my best, is when I can hyper focus on things. And I'm good at jumping case to case to case because it's like a new hit of dopamine. But if I can just like really dig into like one thorny problem, whether it's a case or something facing our business for extended periods of time, then I can do better for this firm. And then bringing on client facing admin people whose sole job is to take care of clients, because in most consumer facing like practice areas, that's a huge time suck. Not to say it's unimportant, right? Like, people are going through scary things, whether it's a divorce or a bankruptcy or a felony case, and they need their hand held, and that takes time. And frankly, I get irritated if I have to do it too much. So
and you don't get paid for it, right? So
right.
that portion of the job is the unpaid portion. So why would you tie up your time with that if you can put someone else in that role?
Right. Well, and if you're flat fee like I am, it's inherently unprofitable.
Right.
And so, I kind of realized, like, okay, I can, areas that either I'm weak in or or just time saving things, I can bring on people. And then, to your original point, that gives us more capacity. And then, well, turns out we can, if we have time to work our cases and to do consults, well, then we can convert more cases and then bring in more money and then hire more people. And so a lot of this stuff it's not like anything new for me. Like, I listen to podcasts like yours all the time. I know the right things to do, but when I can say I have ADHD, so I have to do this to save myself, to save my firm or whatever, then it gives me like a little more clarity and a little more certainty in making the decision, knowing it's the right decision for me and the firm. So just getting diagnosed and becoming more self-aware, that's really that was the catalyst for our growth over the last couple of years.
Yeah, love the detail, and there's a few things I want to dive into, so hopefully I remember them all and we cover them all. But let's start with the ADHD. After the diagnosis, how did you learn to manage it? Was it medication that's that you started taking that helped you, or was it simply understanding it to the point where you're able to navigate through that in a different way than you were doing before?
Yeah, well, the meds help. I'll say that. But it yeah, I mean, it gives me like an excuse when I don't return people's calls or texts a little bit. So that's so I like that portion of it. But it allows me to understand how to do the right things for me. So time blocking is like, if you read half of a business book, at some point time blocking is going to come up. And it's good for everybody, but it's borderline essential if you have ADHD, because if you just let your inbox control things, it's like, an email is not just an email. An email is a rabbit hole in the waiting, or it's because it's going to make me think of other things that are going to make me think of other things. And I'm doing internet research, and then all of a sudden a single email is an hour and a half of my day.
Right. Yeah. And it's not even other things that are business related, right? There's this one email that's a client asking something suddenly has you on Amazon.
Right.
There's lady Jamie Tardy. I forget which is her married name, which is her maiden name. She has a podcast called Eventual Millionaire. And I met her in person at an event, at a bar, where I like kind of like where I met you. And we had a conversation, but she also mentioned, that she's got ADHD, and in subsequent messages back and forth on LinkedIn, she told me that she manages it without medication, and there's a lot of resources around that, and she's very anti-medication. You said meds help. I have at least one child, if not two. I technically have two children now that are diagnosed with ADHD, and my older daughter, who's now an adult and can make decisions for herself. When we put her on medication, she went from a C student to an A student. Like, it was overnight. It was drastically. I mean, it wasn't just the grades. I mean, we saw it in the house. Like, we literally were worried she was going to burn the house down because she'd put something on the stove or something in the toaster and then totally forget that she had started that and move on to the next thing.
Yes.
And and the medication really was a way of controlling that and getting her, getting her to avoid those types of situations. But at the same time, I totally understand if there's a way to manage it without medication, that somebody might desire to do so. What's your own opinion on that and in your own journey? And is that something, like, does the medication bother you, or you're like, no, it works and I'm just going to keep doing my thing, it's fine?
We all have the right, what to put in our body, and I understand people who want to manage anything, especially ADHD, in some other way. But for me, it's and please don't take my last statements out of context. I'm not making any commentary on COVID vaccines, but so anyone who wants to manage it in another way and can do so, that's great. I found for me that the medication is great, and it makes me feel more in control. It actually makes me feel more like the better parts of me, in ways you wouldn't even expect, like cravings for junk food. It was like one thing. I still get them and I still eat not as well as I should, but I'm not seeking stimulation as much because I'm getting the chemicals I need from the medication. So I also remember one of my it's like the first week I was on it, and I was very fortunate. The first thing that my doctor tried worked for me, and I know that there are other people who aren't as fortunate. They have to go through Ritalin and Adderall and whatever the other ones are, before they get it right, if they ever get it right. I was fortunate enough not to have to go through that, but I was going grocery shopping for my family, and I had the grocery list on my phone or whatever, and we were having burrito bowls or something that night, and I noticed beans wasn't on the grocery list. I was like, I should get some beans, right? Like a can of beans, like big whoop. But like for me, I would never, ever, ever have done that if I hadn't been on medication.
Right.
I would have like left only having like 3/4 of the cart, 3/4 of the shopping list done somehow, and then like another 8 things that weren't on the list.
Right. Even people without ADHD have that problem.
Well, yeah.
I always walk out with more than what was on the list when I go shopping.
Right. So,
but I totally get the point, though, that like, it was a drastic difference in your ability to perform, even at the most basic of functions, which is shopping for food for your family.
Yeah. And so I presume most of your audience is lawyers, and as a whole, we're people who like control, and the medication just gives me more of a sense of control in my own life. So
yeah,
that's yeah.
Awesome. Now, are there any resources in case? Okay, I have 2 questions around your ADHD, and then I have other stuff I want to talk about. And I'll just ask the 2 questions so you can wrap them up however you want. For somebody who is a listener that might not know that they have ADHD, how did you come about figuring this out and getting diagnosed? And then once you once you knew you had ADHD, I'm sure that there were resources that you turned that you went into to understand it more and to be able to step into it and perform the best that you can. Are there any resources that you'd like to share with anybody who thinks they might have ADHD?
Yeah. So what originally turned me on to this idea was I was listening to an episode of the Lawyerist podcast. This was actually January of 2020, and they had Marshall Lichty on, and he was formerly he was on staff at Lawyerist, I think, and then he left to start his own thing. His own thing is a company called JDHD. So like JD, like lawyer, ADHD, like ADHD. And he was explaining how ADHD can manifest in people, in high performing people, right? So like, again, there are the kids, you go to elementary school, so you look at them, all right, that kid's got ADHD. And then, but there are some who hide it well, or it shows up differently. And so he started listing off a number of, I think these are actually criteria for diagnosis, and just like check, 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 check. And as he kept listing things, it was like almost all of them described me in some way. And I remember it was on my way home that I was listening to this, and I walk in, I tell my wife, I'm like, I think I have ADHD. And she was like, no, you don't. I have kids in my class. She's a teacher. I have kids in my class who have ADHD. You don't have ADHD. Okay. And then we talked about it some more. And then, turns out I have ADHD. So in good, me fashion, I procrastinated and didn't get diagnosed. Didn't make an appointment to get diagnosed or find out for sure that I don't have ADHD until I think August of 2020. So anyway, it was hearing Marshall Lichty talk and hearing what this looks like in high performing individuals, that's what turned me on to the idea that I had it. And then
I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second.
Yeah,
I just want to share the Lawyerist episode that you're referring to. It's episode number 258. It's called JDs and ADHD with Marshall Lichty. And we're going to link that up in the show notes as well. So you can just click the link to be taken straight to that episode. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you. And then, so the second question, resources. One book I jumped into right away. It's Faster Than Normal by Peter Shankman. I don't think he's not like a neuroscientist or anything like that. He's kind of entrepreneur, speaker, business person, but so it's very much written from his perspective with some science mixed in. But I got the book within a few days of being diagnosed, and I was reading it like a few pages in, and there was this paragraph that I wish I had the book in front of me so I could read it, but it so perfectly summed up my experience reading the words. It was like for the first time in my entire life, I felt like somebody understood me truly. And so I ended up like sobbing on my couch that night. It was wild, but I would definitely recommend that to anyone who thinks they have it. And then it has like his strategies for coping with it and things like that. My psychiatrist recommended it's like a cognitive behavioral therapy workbook put out by Harvard, or doctors at Harvard. I can't think of the name, but that, and then just reading stuff online. Also, there's a great TikTok account that I follow that like he has just incredible insights into things that like I don't even think about as being related to my ADHD, but then he does it. It's like, oh yeah, that's exactly right. I think it's Connor Wolf. So I can get you his handle if you want to link to that in the show notes too.
Yeah, absolutely. When you can, just either drop it in chat, let me know after the interview, and we'll link that up. And I'm trying to figure out which workbook, Harvard workbook you're referring to. I just did a Google search for CBT workbook by Harvard doctors. And there's a CBT workbook that came in for Amazon. There's the cognitive behavioral workbook for anxiety, but I don't know if that's a step-by-step program in the Harvard bookstore. But maybe if you can locate that and share it with my team, we'll link that up in the show notes as well. All right. I want to switch gears. This is great. I mean, I'm sure that there are listeners who have ADHD, don't know it. There are other listeners who have ADHD but haven't figured out how to manage it. And I think that sharing these resources and giving them a place to go learn more would be very helpful for them. So I'm glad that we covered this. There's one thing interesting that you shared about your law firm, which is that you are a flat fee practice. And I'm a huge fan of flat fee. And there's a lot of people who think that flat fee cannot be done in their firm because they're litigation. They can't control the number of hours. And criminal law is one of those things that I would think falls into that camp. So I want to dive into how you navigated introducing flat fee for your firm and how you figured out a way to keep a lid on your exposure while being able to offer that, because I think there's a lot of our listeners who can learn from your own experience on how they might be able to rethink this for their firm.
Yeah. Well, so part of it is it's kind of I don't know if it's the industry standard, but it's very common in criminal law to do flat fees. And that firm I worked for before starting my own, that's how he did it. And I liked that. I worked for like an insurance defense firm in law school. Makes me want to barf even saying it, but I did. And even then I had to bill hours, and I didn't know I had ADHD at the time, but I knew enough to know when I started my firm that I'm never ever gonna send out these invoices. I'm not gonna remember to track my time most of the time. I'm gonna be guessing at the end of the week most weeks. So I'll just do flat fees. And then from there, it was just kind of me doing a lot of guesstimating. And then there was a study done, I think it was the Rand Corporation that did it a few years ago, like for Michigan's Indigent Defense Commission. And they had this this table in there that was like based on severity of case, the median number of hours you'd expect to put into a case. And so I took those numbers, I multiplied by, slightly higher than average market rate, and then multiply that by like 1.2 to account for overages and the possibility of trial. And that's how we have our current fee schedule. And then from there, we've kind of simplified a little bit. So it's not like, I don't expect everyone who works in the firm to know the difference between a class A and B and C and D and E and F and G and H felony. So we've kind of clumped them into high severity felonies, low severity felonies, misdemeanors, OWIs. So that's why we do it. And we do like a true flat fee, but including trial. We are rethinking that after I just spent like a week of my life for this misdemeanor OWI trial, where it's just that particular case was incredibly unprofitable. But we do have the cases that are highly profitable, because prosecutors overcharge a case, so we charge at that rate because we're assuming risk, and then we get a good plea deal and everybody's happy.
Yeah, the key to succeeding at flat fees is to actually track what's happening and see what the results are, because it is a law of averages. You're anecdotally, taking a single case and saying, oh my gosh, look at this risk we have, look at this exposure
Mhm.
that we have. I have to spend a week on something that I collected. I don't know what the dollar amount is, but I collected $1,500 and I just spent a week of my time. And I could have produced 15,000 or 150,000 in that week. And now I wasted it on this one case. But then when you look at overall over the scope of the entire year of everything collected, was the revenue per attorney high enough that
Right.
your profit margins are good and you have a good business model? And if it is, then you got to take the ones that suck with all the ones that are really good, and they all average together.
Right. And I have I didn't mention the almost $20,000 case that spent like 3 or 4 hours of attorney time on, you know, to to get it completed. So point taken.
And so they balance each other out, right? um do you have a target revenue metric per attorney that that helps guide you on how you're doing and whether your business is doing well or not?
Uh, I think I mentioned it briefly at the beginning. Not great with my numbers. I'm a
Hmm.
very intuitive in how I make my decisions. If it feels right, it's right. If it doesn't, it's not. And
Hmm.
it's worked fairly well, but I know, we're getting to a point where that's not good enough.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, and I think that it having this conversation right now is a great conversation to have, because there's a lot of people who are just winging it, right? And the only way that whether it's working or not is, am I able to take home money and feed my family? Am I able to pay my bills? And does the firm still run and everything seems to be clicking okay? And that's your yardstick, that's your metric. But when you are looking to scale, when you're looking to grow, when and you want to create something significantly larger, you have to be able to replicate. You have to be able to do the same thing over and over again. The only way to do that is have those things figured out. You got to have
Mhm.
some metrics figured out. One rule of thumb that I share with my clients is you want every attorney at a minimum to be bringing in revenue that's 5 times their cost to you, right? So they should cost no more than 20% of their production. So if you're paying somebody 120, then they should be bringing in 600,000 in revenue a year. And that'll, just that one rule of thumb will probably get you pretty close to our target is a 40% profit margin before tax. And that'll probably get you pretty close to it if you're able to get your attorneys billing at that amount. And it's also like, when you have that rule of thumb, you can then do a checkpoint, like, am I charging enough? Right. If
Mhm.
if my attorneys are busy and they're full, and I'm thinking about, okay, I need to hire the next attorney, and I look and they're only billing 400,000, but I'm paying them 120, then, and by the way, paying them 120 doesn't mean they're getting 120. It's like after taxes and benefits and all of that. So you might be paying them 90 and it's costing you 120. But it's your cost. So if you're, if you should be at 600 and you're at 400, you don't want to keep replicating that, right? You don't want to keep growing a firm that has a razor thin profit margin. It's going to get you in trouble in the long run. What you want to do is you want to focus on fixing that, which goes back to your conversation of, hey, maybe we need to rework our pricing. Maybe we need to figure out, where are they spending the bulk of their time, tweaking the what we're charging for these packages, and fix it there. But you don't know there's a problem if you don't have metrics to follow. So you're astute in realizing and understanding that, hey, my intuition's got me this far, but it might not be the thing that's going to get me to the next level. And maybe it's something I need to start paying more attention to. And you don't give yourself enough credit, by the way. You say you're not very good with your numbers, but then you talked about how you came up
Sure.
with the pricing that you did.
Yeah.
And you took a study of average hours. You then multiplied it times a fee that you wanted to charge that was
Mhm.
above market. You added a 20% fudge factor. Like,
Yeah. So
you've done it.
I'm a good creator, not a good manager or administrator of,
Right.
So yeah, but thank you.
So, Dustyn, again, this is something. So, over my shoulder, there's a book called Traction. Are you familiar with it?
Oh yes. Yep.
Yeah. So, Traction, Gino Wickman introduces this idea of the visionary and the integrator, right? You don't have to be good at the management of those numbers, right? You just have to hire somebody who is.
That's the next hire, is the integrator, because I know I'm not that. And
yeah, and that's perfect. What's awesome is that you know that, right? I've gotten this far in this journey on my own, but if I want to keep going, there's somebody else is going to have to take over the reins of some of this operational stuff that I'm in charge of, and I got to get somebody into that role. Do you have a strategy of how you're going to fill that role?
I I've kind of put some feelers out into my personal network locally. I also last week I searched integrator on LinkedIn, and anyone who had that in their profile, I just sent them a message, and so far I have a 0% response rate. So figured that probably wasn't the best thing, but
right.
Yeah, I want to make the decision slowly because I want to get it right. But yeah.
So one of the things that I've found in my own experiences, and I'll share it with you here and with our listeners, is going out and hiring somebody for the integrator role is a tough job to do, right? It's essentially saying, I need to go, let's call the integrator something else that people can understand: a chief operating officer, a business manager, an office manager, right? Those are all roles or titles that would essentially be your integrator. Usually the people who step into that role are already working in your company in another role. You're not usually hiring somebody specifically to be your COO unless you're, a large corporation and you're pulling somebody who was a COO or somewhere else, or a CEO somewhere else. You're putting them in that role. It's very difficult to find the right person to put them in there. And what I found is that if you hire somebody as an executive assistant, right, start taking over responsibilities from your plate in that role, you get a lot more people interested, right? Because a lot more people looking for that job. You can be a lot more selective in who you bring on. And then essentially they're stepping into that role by taking tasks off your plate one by one. So you call them an executive assistant, but before you know it, you turn around and 6 months later, they are your integrator.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know. We should touch base again in the future and see how your search went, where that journey took you, what you ended up doing. Come back and do another check-in and see how that went. This is we're out of time, so we're going to wrap up the episode here. This is an incredible journey that you've been on. You've achieved a lot in 4 years, and there's a lot of people who struggle for many years to get the firm to be where your firm is today. So definitely, kudos to you. Give yourself a pat on the back. You've done the right things, and I know that it took you a while to get going, because until you figured out the ADHD piece, it wasn't really chugging along for you. But a lot of other people it's not ADHD that's going to unlock it for them, right? But what it did for you is it allowed you to focus. It allowed you to stay true to what you were trying to do, which is to build your business. And so many law firm owners get lost in the process, right? They start. It's easier to practice law than it is to grow your business. and they get stuck in the weeds of the day-to-day practicing of law. And you were smart enough to realize that, hey, I got to bring an attorney in to do that so that I could continue to grow this business. And that, the faster that we can get somebody to bring on an attorney to start doing the legal stuff so that they can focus on everything else, the faster that they're going to grow. The way that I describe it to my clients is, if you're by yourself, you don't have another attorney working for you, how much of your day is actually dedicated to legal work? Probably 25% at most, maybe 30, for somebody who's really pushing it, right? So if you think about that metric that I gave you of what an attorney should be able to bring in revenue, your capacity to bring in revenue is only 25% of that.
Yeah.
So the most revenue that you could bring in when you don't have an attorney working for you is 200,000 or 150,000, right? Or 250,000. You're stuck in that range. But if you bring in somebody who's dedicated to legal work, they're not doing anything else, they could bring in 600,000. That's possible from one person. So the longer that you hold on to that role and don't hand it off to somebody else, the longer you're going to prevent yourself from being able to really unlock the financial faucet for your firm's growth. And people just don't get that. They have a hard time wrapping their head around it. It's an audio podcast. They're visual learners that even though we're talking about it, it's going to go right over their head. But the name of the game is getting an attorney into the firm, because the moment that you do that, you unlock the potential of what your firm can handle, opens up the gateways of the floodgates of legal work that's possible for your firm. That, you talked about getting woo earlier. It's a woo concept, but essentially it's all about capacity, right? The world is not going to send you legal work that you can't handle.
Right.
And when you have capacity for it, it'll come. And you have to subscribe to that. You have to be willing to take some risk, bring somebody on, and and grow in that way. So Dustyn, as we wrap up, and I know that you wrote a book. We didn't talk about that at all on this episode. We were supposed to mention it at some point. But you wrote a book for your audience. Just real quick before we wrap up, tell us about the book and how that's been used as a marketing tool for you.
Yeah, so the book is Surviving a Criminal Case in Michigan, parentheses, and Picking Up the Pieces Afterwards. What I did, I basically just wrote about the entire criminal process in the state of Michigan. Not specific to sex crimes or OWI or gun crimes, but just these are the steps of the way. And then, here are the possible collateral consequences depending on the crime. And here's how expungements and pardons and all that stuff work. And I also wanted to put it in, I didn't want it to read like a lawyer had written it or an SEO company had written it. I wanted it to be just kind of raw and real. And so that's the book. I published it like right at the beginning of the pandemic. My hope was to get a bunch of copies like in the local jails and then repurpose some of the content. The repurposing of content is slowly happening. The jail thing has happened by accident, but not intentionally. But it's been a really good tool for consultations and onboarding new clients. Like, oh, by the way, here's this book that Dustyn wrote, and it gives like a little extra sense of authority that we know what we're doing here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder if there are people who are searching for a solution and your book's coming up on Amazon and they're buying it and then coming to your firm and saying, hey, I read your book and I want your firm to represent me.
Yeah.
I love that. And we've actually had some guests on the show who have talked about book writing. There's services that out there that can basically interview you to write your book for you. So if you're not a writer, you're not going to sit down and write it, but you do want to do something like this for your own marketing. There are services out there that'll help you get that book written. And you don't have to be an accomplished author with, bestsellers for this to be really, really valuable. I don't remember who it was, but I once heard somebody say, my book that I wrote is the best business card that I've ever created.
Mhm.
And essentially you just hand it out as your business card. So love that. All right. So as we wrap up the show, what I like to do is I like to ask my guests to leave one lasting piece of advice for our listeners. So if you had to bottle up your experience and say, hey, this is the one thing that I would tell another law firm owner if I was giving them a piece of advice, what would that be? And then following that, how would somebody, if you want to share, how would somebody get in touch with you or send you business if they, if the opportunity arose or anything like that? Attend a free coaching session with one of our coaches, and you can get there at profitwithlaw.com/free coaching. So I invite you to take advantage of that. There's really no strings attached, even though there is an opportunity to join our program at the end. There's no pressure. There's no obligation. We're not a high pressure sales team. If it's for you, great. If not, also great. So take advantage of that free coaching session and go to profitwithlaw.com/free coaching.
Yeah. So my number one piece of advice is know thyself, right? It's advice that's been around for thousands of years, but it really is it. If you have an idea of where you want to go, you're how you get there, and you need to know how to operate yourself. And so figuring out who you are is the most important thing. For folks who want to get in touch with me, I'm on the socials. I'm probably most active on TikTok, but you can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. And then anyone who knows someone accused of a crime in the state of Michigan can just send them to CoontzLaw.com.
Awesome, Dustyn. Thank you so much, folks.
Yeah.
If this is your first time listening to the podcast and you really love this conversation with Dustyn, we've got over 300 episodes for you to go back and binge on. Besides for that, hit the subscribe button in your podcast player. This way you get notified every time we release a new episode. We release 1 to 2 episodes a week at a minimum, and excited to share that with you. Your podcast player will let you know when that next episode drops. Dustyn, thank you so much for your time and for being giving with our audience. Folks, we'll be back next week with another great episode for you. Take care. Have you been enjoying the show? We sure hope so. To make sure you never miss an episode, be sure to hit the subscribe button in your podcast player app. Next week, we will be back with more valuable resources and ideas on how to break the mold and take your law firm to the next level.